This is Around the Farm, the podcast about all things ag, and I'm your host, Rick Myra. Today we're talking about digital tools to improve crop monitoring and scouting. We're joined by Greg Rose and Connor Schmidt from Intelinair, a leader in field imagery and analysis for a complete view of every acre of every field. Today we're going to learn about how their tools are helping farmers across the Corn Belt. Well, Intelinair team, thank you so much for joining us. Greg and Connor, appreciate you guys spending some time around the farm with us. Just so our listeners get a little bit of background on you guys before we get started, Greg, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started in ag tech?
Sure. So my name's Greg Rose. I'm the Vice President of Business Development and Strategy and co-founder for Intelinair. I grew up in the Chicagoland suburbs, no background in agriculture. In fact, to tell a funny story, we would take family vacations driving through rural areas, and I'd often think to myself as a kid, who eats all that corn out there? But went on to get an engineering degree at Northwestern, an MBA at UCLA. I've worked for several venture-backed technology startup companies and have helped bring several new products to market, mostly in the area of analytics. So Intelinair has really been my entry to ag tech. So we started the company in late 2014. So that's how I found myself in this space.
Well, Greg, as a fellow individual who grew up about 45 minutes south of Chicago, I need to ask you a very important question. And just understand, if you answer this question incorrectly, I'm going to hit the eject button, and we're just going to fire you off the screen here, buddy. Is it Cubs or Sox?
For me, it's always been White Sox because when I was a kid in grammar school, they used to give free tickets to our school. But having said that, everybody else in my family was a Cubs fan, including my grandfather, who was probably one of the biggest Cubs fans you could imagine. So, but yeah, personally, I was always more a White Sox fan.
I'm glad you got that one right, fellow Southsider here. So we don't have to hit the eject button. I'm really glad about that. And hey, you know what? Free tickets are always a great way to build a fan base. I got a number of those when we were in Little League as well on the South Side. So appreciate you joining us and lending your expertise. And Connor, I want to kick it over to you. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into ag tech?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of a strange and random story. I did grow up on a family farm in Mount Pulaski, Illinois. We had hogs. We had row crops, and it was great. In the 90s, when that hog market crashed, my family got out of farming. We moved to a nice town and all of that. My dad stayed involved in agriculture, but I didn't really want much to do with it, honestly. Didn't really understand it, didn't like it, and I got involved in athletics. And long story short, I ended up at University of Illinois playing football. Got to see a lot there. Beckman, Cubitt, Lovey, a lot of turmoil, interesting time. I switched from an ag business degree to a kinesiology degree, like a weightlifting degree, against my father's wishes. And, about when I graduated, when I realized I was probably going to have to be a PE teacher or something like that, decided I did not want to do that. And got on, Greg actually hired me 3 years ago. It was like a pity intern through some mutual connections. And I've been here 3 years. I absolutely fell in love with it. Just the startup, agriculture, the culture of it, all the decisions, complexity, and just trying to help these people in very complex problems. It just kind of consumed me. So 3 years later, I'm now the regional sales manager, working with growers, retail, across the board, helping with the product. So it's been a fun ride.
A very Illinois centric show today, which that speaks near and dear to my heart as an Illinois guy. I will tell you, Connor. Hey, if you want to get back into coaching, next time you can try to coach at the football team in Central Illinois that actually wins things. Illinois State University. It's right down the highway there. You can't miss it. It's unbelievable.
I'm not a big fan of the small time schools.
I'm just saying, Redbird Nation. Come on, buddy. Come on now. Well, hey guys, we could wax poetic about Illinois and Bloomington and Normal for days here if we wanted to, but I'm not sure all of our listeners want to hear quite that much about the old stomping grounds of a bunch of Illinois guys. So let's jump right in here. And Greg, as a wise man once said, it's always wise to start at the beginning. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you started the company and what brought you into ag tech?
Sure. So Intelinair started in late 2014. The CEO, Ali Sayan, and our chief scientist, Naira Hovakimian, who's a professor at University of Illinois, we were the ones who started the company and really just interviewed a lot of farmers, hundreds of farmers, agronomists, ag retailers, just talked to so many different folks, especially that first year, really as we developed the product and just trying to understand, what were the problems that they faced, what were the issues that they had. It was clear that farming is a very stressful occupation. It's one of those things where, you can do everything right, but, if Mother Nature, turns on you or the, maybe something happens in Brazil, that has nothing to do with the US or China or whatnot, the whole market can change and the whole economics can change. So, that stress was clear, and it was also clear that farmers just needed better visibility, especially into what was happening during the season. They have certainly a lot of data, about everything from weather to how the equipment is performing and so forth. But when it comes to the crop performance, a lot of it is just, driving around, so to speak, with the pickup truck, kind of looking, maybe walking out into the fields every now and then, but it's just very hard to get systematic visibility across how all those crops are doing across all of your fields, right? And so, the idea of lighting that up made a lot of sense to me. I mentioned that, I have a background where I've worked in a lot of different analytical applications, and you think of farming and you think of all the precision sorts of things folks are trying to do, where they're trying to plant different prescriptions and different, varieties and nitrogen management strategies and so forth. Well, you've got to have good data to be able to validate, is that stuff working, right? If I'm buying a new piece of equipment, and is it doing what I expected it to do? In terms of improving crop performance. And it can just be challenging at the end of the season to try, look at a yield map and try to disentangle everything that happened up until that point, right? So we developed, introduced Ag MRI, measurable, reliable intelligence is the acronym. We use airplanes. We fly 13 times during the season. Once in early April, our pre-plant flight, weekly May and June, and then every 2 weeks in July and August and early September. We capture imagery at a very high resolution of 10 centimeter per pixel, so we're able to discern the individual corn or soybean plants. We have algorithms that look for patterns, look for issues, look for problems. We cross-correlate what we see in the imagery to other data layers. So, we bring in equipment data from FieldView, weather data, soil data. And when we see a thing that's a problem, we package that as an alert. and we push that to the user's smartphone, and they're able to click and just immediately zoom into what we think what the top issues are in their field or field. So this year we're analyzing almost 4 million acres of fields, and work with farmers of all sizes from 1,000 acres to frankly many tens of thousands of acres. Ag retailers, input producers, and more. So it's been quite a and certainly I no longer feel like an ag novice now. I don't know as much as the farmers yet. Probably never will, but certainly learned a lot about the space, and really enjoy being in it and helping folks solve problems to grow more food for us.
Well, it is a timely topic. I mean, we're sitting here in the middle of growing season. There is a ton of crop scouting going on, and in our last episode, we had a conversation with a research farm manager talking about how much time it does take to get out there and scout fields, and how tools can help with that. Yeah, Connor, you spend a lot of time talking to folks out in the countryside. How does Intelinair's Ag MRI platform really set apart from some of the other services out there?
So first, I'd say frequency is a big differentiating factor when you're looking at other airplane companies. There's a lot of flights to order. There's a lot of flights planned around critical time points and things of that nature. What we've found is you're never going to be able to time that exactly when you need it, especially at scale. You don't know when the problems are going to occur that you need to look at. I would say that's only good for very specific applications. Like you grow specialty crops and you're wanting to look at a certain stage to make a precise fungicide application or something. But in general, it's not going to give you the visibility you need across everything. And a lot of times what ends up happening on those flights to order, they don't get delivered at the right time point, especially if there's other people like in that region that are also ordering flights that detract from that capacity. So there's logistic issues if you really dig into those models. The second is analytics. Farmers don't want to be experts on imagery data. They want to be experts on farming. And last, and this is more specific to us in contrast, our solution's kind of built around a lot of these operational components of farming. So farmers don't necessarily manage their operation individual field by individual field. If you think weed control, they've planned when to spray everything, what they're spraying. They've already laid out an entire plan around that. It's operation wide. And they need a service that helps them manage that component, not each field individually. Where can I spray? Where do I need to spray? Where do I need to adjust? Where did things not die? Where do I need to reapply? And they need to see that at a glance. Otherwise, it'd be faster just to go do it themselves. And the last thing, I've seen some services that do partial images, right? Grid images, and they may take that and create a heat map. Often those are very high resolution. So you can see the type of disease. You can see how many beetles are on a corn leaf, which is amazing. But when you think about that, the practicality of it. So I have these different, plots in my field in a grid, and I see there's 20 beetles in this image, and then that extrapolates across a heat map. That's not going to be very indicative of what's happening in the whole field necessarily. The same for stand or disease, and it also that type of resolution isn't able to be collected at scale. So in the decision making, it's often what do I need to spray first? What's my largest priority? How bad is it? And a lot of times that's relative to everything else, not by individual field. So on all those points, what Intelinair does different, sorry to get long-winded, but it's the full season, bare soil, all the way to harvest. The analytics are designed to work with you. It starts with weed control, all your weeds at a glance, which ones are bad. It shows you automatically where you've sprayed and weeds didn't die. It shows you where you can spray, where you can't, based on soil conditions, so on and so forth. Then emergence. It shows you the emergence across all your fields, which ones are bad, which ones aren't. Where do I need to go scout? Where is something not looking how I expected? We get 6 inches of rain. You're still planting. It actually shows you where to replant, which fields, how many acres of replant do I have? That was incredibly helpful this year. The point being, all of this is automated. It's your full operation and throughout the whole season. Sorry to get on a tangent, but I think it's important to know what all is available because it's kind of a new space in general.
Absolutely. I mean, the difference is in the detail, right? You talk about resolution, and I always liken it to what you can see and what you can't see, right? I mean, a lot of satellite image providers, it's like old Tecmo Bowl football, right? You got a real pixelated Bo Jackson running circles around somebody. And what you're describing there, Connor, is full boat 2020 Madden where you can see sweat pouring off the player's face as you're going through, right? That's a whole different level of understanding of what's happening in a given field. But here's the thing. I mean, digital ag is one of those things where farmers are looking at it going, yeah, that makes sense. I think that this is going to be helpful, but I'm not quite sure how I get started. So, if you're talking to a farmer that's interested in getting started with you guys, what would you tell them? How would they start to get into remote sensing and start to use ag MRI?
You're setting me up for a lot of long-winded questions. I'd like to make that a bit broader, actually. Where to begin with digital ag in general. And if you start there, because I've met a lot of farmers who don't have yield mapping yet. Maybe their equipment's old or it's custom, so on and so forth. So where to begin? Where are you at today? What do you have available? If you don't have yield maps, you don't have machine data collected, something like Climate would be a great start. And what can you see yourself utilizing? Right? So there's a lot of cool solutions out there, more than you could ever count. And as you're receiving the information about it, does it make sense for my operation? Do I see myself stopping to use this? These technology products aren't like a chemical. You spray it, forget about it, and you'll know how it did. If you invest in a technology, you have to use it. And I'd also say, where can you eliminate overlaps? There are so many products. All of them probably have unique capabilities, and they also have a lot of overlap around weather, modeling, scouting platforms, so on and so forth. I have not seen a farmer that has 10 different digital platforms and utilizes them all to their full capability. So where can you start eliminating pieces that don't make sense and make sure whatever you do end up with works together, they're complementary, and they're actually going to help you.
One thing that I've always found that helps is those practical examples, right? I mean, can you help us with an example that you've had with the farmer you've worked with where you've been able to help them with ag MRI for their operation?
Yeah, I can. I think it'd be a lot easier to show you, though.
Whoa, wait a minute. We've got an Around the Farm first here. Folks, we're going to the tape. Visual aids. If you're on the podcast, it's time to put that thing away and get on YouTube because you don't want to miss out on the visuals we're about to get here.
Let me go ahead and pull this up. So I've actually got a few examples. I was talking about the full season, broken up into flight cycles. I want to show you why it's important to fly the entire season and what you could expect to get out of a remote sensing application like this. So I'm going to start at the beginning. The first cycle, bare soil. It's great for weed control. So right off the bat, a lot of application issues. And I chose this one because it's extremely interesting. If you look at this third image, you can actually see those are the tire tracks of the sprayer, and those weeds were not dying right behind it. We did a lot of investigation work here, and what we found, it was Roundup that was sprayed. And when you drive too fast with a sprayer and kick up dust, it can actually affect that chemical and make it less effective. In the top left there, I've actually thrown up some of the application data we import from Climate. And this field right here was driven around 19 to 22 miles an hour. Most of the other fields that did not have this issue, about 18 miles an hour. Made a significant difference. So yeah, he got to go respray this, but also huge insight for all of the people running those sprayers at the right speed they need to be going to make sure those applications are effective. And this year with all the rain, I know a lot of farmers ended up in a position where they weren't able to get through all of their burn down. They wanted to get the fields planted. This was a great tool for some people looking across their operation. Where do I have clean fields that I can wait? Where do I absolutely need to spray right now? This is a great instance of that. I threw up a few fields this farmer was able to pull out. These first two on the left, bit too wet to spray anyways. Also doesn't have much weed pressure. As soon as they dry up, he's gonna go plant them. It's not gonna spray them. This third one, weeds were out of control, and it was actually dry enough to spray on that date. What I have up there is May 1st. And right there on May 24th, you can see went ahead, sprayed it, killed all the weeds, was done with it. So definitely helped them make those decisions, but a lot more efficient than driving out to all those fields. Getting into the second cycle, we started to have some emergence. So where should I prioritize my post-application? Where to start? Here's a field where there was a lot of weeds coming up much sooner than expected, and it was actually about 50 miles away from where this farmer is located. Huge time saving for him not to drive all the way out there and check it out, or to dish it off and push it down the road and have those weeds get out of control. So very easy for him to go out and apply there. And we also started to get these emergence maps, which was really incredible. Coming up right at about VE on a lot of fields, there was some great performance. This is an example. This field has some slopes, sand, bunch of different soil types. He does minimal till up on the slopes, conventional till, and the flats, and he adjusts his populations for that. So in the second image, that's one of the better areas, the perfect stand that our emergence map was indicating. As you can see, perfect stand, planted 120,000. And he actually does account for the residue. He plants those areas, I believe, at 140,000. I can't see my slides, but I believe he ended up with about 109,000. So even less plants, even though he increased the population in those areas. So he's going to do some work to the header on his combine to be a little more aggressive when he's harvesting and help control that residue, distribute a bit easier. Something that was really cool when we talked about the resolution on the maps, he was actually able to see exactly the residue distribution on some different thermal maps and some true color maps. Where's the residue lying? He could match it up with the combine and see it wasn't being spread evenly. And in those areas where it was dense, it was falling right back in the furrow and creating problems.
Well, Connor, those are some really great examples of real-world applications where farmers are seeing the benefit of ag MRI. As you go through those examples, one thing that always strikes me is how powerful it is when you can start to identify issues before you can actually see them. Because the old adage is, by the time you've seen crop damage, you've experienced yield loss, right? So, Greg, can you talk to us a little bit about how Intelinair is able to utilize science to really be able to start to identify issues before we can even see them?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So from a remote sensing standpoint, we capture imagery in the visible range, red, green, blue, which would be what any human being can see, which would be somewhat equivalent to what you would capture with a normal camera. But we also capture imagery in the near infrared band. So this is outside the human range of sight. And it turns out that plants, while they tend to absorb light in the visible range, they tend to reflect light in the near infrared range. And by using that data in the form of various indices, a common one would be NDVI, the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. You can effectively come up with a measure of stress or health for that plant, where plants that, let's say are sick, are sickly, yellowed leaves and so forth, are just going to have different reflective properties than plants that are very healthy. And so what we do from an analytical perspective is we'll look at patterns in those stress, in that stress. So we'll look for areas where we see an unusually high decrease in health. We'll look for areas where we see a relative difference in health that's just not explainable by what we know about the field. And those usually correlate to problems, often, for example, nitrogen deficiencies or other issues. We also we also have a thermal sensor that basically measures the heat radiating off the field. And so we have a temperature profile of that field. And from an analytical perspective, we look at variances in temperature. And again, we look at areas where there's variances that are not explainable by what we know about the field. And often those are going to correlate to such conditions as water stress, disease, and other issues. So, that combined with the fact that we're also imaging every single acre in every single flight, which is also a big deal because it gives us a chance to, an image part of a field where, you may not think there's a problem, but there is a problem. So those are really the things we do to give that farmer that proactive or predictive awareness of what's going on.
Well, Greg, simplicity and ease of use is always a big deal in digital tools as well. And I know that Intelinair's Ag MRI has been built to work with other platforms. Can you help our listeners understand how you guys have engineered the system so that it's going to work with many of the other digital tools that they might be working with today?
Sure. So Ag MRI has been architected to support a set of what are called APIs or application programming interfaces. And this basically gives our software a way to talk seamlessly with other software products. And so we've integrated Ag MRI with all of the major ag data platforms out there. Digital ag platforms out there. For example, we do integrate seamlessly with Climate FieldView. And the benefits to the customer are just ease of use and easy engagement, low touch engagement. So they can simply log into Ag MRI, they can authorize a connection with FieldView. We can then bring their boundaries in to automatically onboard them. We can also bring in other data from FieldView should the farmer, give us those permissions. For example, equipment data, application data, and if a few minutes ago Connor had given some examples of how we can better use that data to better define the problem. And so, for example, if you've got two fields, one that has not been sprayed, and there's weeds visible, and one that was recently sprayed and there's weeds visible, it's really a different level of priority that we're going to assign to that alert, because in that latter case, you could be potentially dealing with resistance, for example, or a botched application. The other thing is that we can push our data and alerts into these other solutions as well. So a farmer can choose to push the imagery from Ag MRI, the alerts from Ag MRI into FieldView, for example. And so that way, if they're in the cab using FieldView, they're able to just bring up a side-by-side view of the imagery that Ag MRI provides. So those are the ways we work with other products and support a farmer in those use cases.
Well, tons of great information on Intelinair and the products you guys offer. I know we're only scratching the surface. So if our listeners are interested in finding out more, what's the best way for them to find you guys or find more information?
Sure. So we have a website, of course, Intelinair.com, Intelinair.com. We have a lot of different data sheets and examples of the product in action there. We also have a YouTube channel, which has a number of different videos, some of which include Connor. So if you guys liked hearing from him, go to the YouTube channel. And some of our colleagues have a series of videos there where we show specific parts of the app in action in different alert cases. You can also email us, sales@Intelinair.com. And you're also welcome to email either Connor or I directly And it would just be our first name, Conner, CONNER, at Intelinair.com, or Greg, GREG, at Intelinair.com. And we'd be happy to do anything we can to help you.
Well, gentlemen, we appreciate you taking some time with us. Before we let you get out the door, we've got to have a couple of fun questions here. We've started to ask all of our experts that come on the panel for their best advice that they heard around farming. You know, we're going to go ahead and author a book, Pearls of Wisdom, put that out, New York Times bestseller, no doubt about it. I mean, but Greg, you know, as somebody that's a little bit newer to the industry and took a bit of a different path to get here, what's the best advice you've ever heard around farming?
Well, I think one thing that comes to mind was a farmer told me once. He said, you know, I always pay much more attention to the good areas of my field than the bad, because, you know, the good areas are really where you're going to make, you know, a lot of your money. And, you know, if you see performance drop there, you know, you've really got to be on that to fix that. Whereas the bad areas, look, if you can improve the performance in there, that's obviously great. But, you know, to some extent, you know, that's kind of icing on the cake. So that, you know, was interesting because, you know, certainly as a newcomer, you know, initially I think that you just focus on the worst areas of the field and try to make them better. But, you know, I think that's not necessarily the case.
No, it's good advice. How about you, Conner?
Yeah, I have to say, farmers have the best advice for life in general. One of the guys I work with a lot, he's big on if you can't drink all day if you don't start drinking early. And that's what he lives by. It's made him very successful and happy.
Hey, you know, the early bird gets the worm, right?
Absolutely.
Hey, one last thing before we let you guys get out of here. Conner is a gentleman that lives there near where I frequented for my college education. I got to ask you, what's your favorite appetizer over there at the pub too?
At the pub too, probably the onion rings.
The onion rings are not a bad choice. We were accepting buffalo wings as the number one answer, but we'll give you the consolation prize anyway. The more important question, and Greg, you know, you answered correctly on the front end, saying the Southsiders. I'm hoping you get this one right too. Best deep dish in Chi-Town is?
I have to go with Geno's. That's always been my favorite.
Well, I'm going to have to hit the eject button because we know the right answer there is Lou Malnati's or even Pequod's, but that's all right. We'll let you slide on Geno's. Everybody's got their own opinions, different taste for different folks. So, Greg, Conner, thanks so much for joining us around the farm today. We appreciate you sharing your expertise.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was a pleasure.
And while we're saying thanks, I'd like to thank our listeners for downloading the podcast and listening in via YouTube. We appreciate you spending time around the farm. For our listeners that are FieldView users, we know that this has been a challenging season. If you need any additional support, don't hesitate to reach out to us at 888-924-7475 for help, or you can email us at support@climate.com. If you'd like some tips and tricks on how to stay connected for this season, visit www.climate.com/stay-connected. Hey, you know what? Our best ideas always come from you, so please give me a shout out on Twitter. You can find us at the @FieldView Twitter handle and use the hashtag FieldViewATF. And while you're giving feedback, we would never turn down that 5-star review. Folks, as always, it's been a blast, and we'll see you around the farm.